You ever watch your entire life get torn down in front of you and realize you're the only one in the room not surprised? The first thing that hit me wasn't the sound. It was the vibration. A low, grinding hum that traveled up through the soles of my boots and settled somewhere behind my ribs. Then came the crack of splintering wood, sharp and dry, like a branch snapping in winter. I stepped out onto what used to be my front porch, except the porch was already gone. Just dust hanging in the morning air, glowing gold in the Texas sunlight, and a yellow excavator parked where my living room had been less than 10 minutes ago. Diesel fumes burned the back of my throat. The operator didn't even look at me, just kept working the controls like I wasn't standing there watching him peel my house apart, piece by piece. Across the gravel driveway, a small group had gathered. Clipboards, sunglasses, that quiet, satisfied posture of people who think they're completely in the right. And right in the center of them, Margaret Holloway. White blazer, perfect hair, coffee cup in hand like this was just another scheduled appointment. She saw me, of course, gave me that same thin smile she'd been using for the past 3 weeks. The one that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Cole," she called out, raising her voice just enough to carry over the engine noise. "You were notified multiple times. Failure to comply with HOA dues results in enforcement action." Enforcement action. That's what she called it. I glanced down at the remains of my front door lying crooked in the dirt, the brass handle still attached, catching the light like it didn't belong there anymore. I didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling the grit of concrete dust settle on my skin. Because the truth is, I'd already seen this moment play out. Not like a vision or anything dramatic, just patterns, paper trails, the kind of small, quiet details people like Margaret never think anyone's paying attention to. The certified letters, the timing of the fines, the way the local inspector stopped returning my calls right after her husband's name showed up on a zoning document. 3 weeks ago, I realized exactly what they were building toward, and I let it happen. The excavator arm lifted again, metal joints hissing, then came down with another controlled push. More wood gave way, more dust. Somewhere behind me, a car door slammed. Probably another board member arriving to witness the finale. Margaret took a slow sip of her coffee, eyes never leaving me now. She was waiting for me to yell, to argue, to beg. That's how this usually went for her. People pushed until they broke, then signed whatever paper she put in front of them. I tilted my head slightly, watching the machine carve through what used to be my kitchen wall. The sunlight cut straight through the frame now, clean and open, like the house had never been there at all. "You sure you want to finish this?" I asked, calm, steady, just loud enough for her to hear. For a second, just a second, her smile flickered. Not gone, just thinner. Then she set her coffee down on the hood of her car, straightened her blazer, and nodded to the operator. The machine didn't hesitate, and neither did I, because everything they were doing, every single action, was exactly what I needed them to do. I learned a long time ago that people like Margaret do not start with demolition. They build up to it, one polite letter at a time, one carefully worded threat wrapped in legal language until it feels official enough that nobody questions it. And 3 weeks ago it started with an envelope that smelled like fresh ink and authority sitting in my mailbox at exactly 8:14 in the morning. I remember because the sun had just cleared the oak tree at the edge of the property, and the gravel still held the cool from the night before. The paper inside was thick, heavier than standard print, stamped with the HOA logo like it meant something, claiming I owed $6,400 in overdue dues and penalties, a number precise enough to feel real, but just vague enough to avoid specifics. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time, listening to the distant hum of lawn mowers from across the street and the soft click of a sprinkler system starting up next door. Everything about the neighborhood looked calm, controlled, normal, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. Because I had just closed on this property 4 months earlier, paid in full, clean title, no outstanding liens. I knew exactly what I owed and exactly what I did not. So I called the number at the bottom of the letter, and when Margaret answered, she sounded exactly like she did this morning, smooth, patient, like she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. She told me records can be complicated, that previous owners sometimes leave behind obligations, that the association had every right to enforce compliance, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end like she was performing the part, When I asked for documentation, she said it would be provided in due time. When I asked for clarification, she redirected, always calm, always certain, and that was when I stopped arguing. Because certainty without detail is not confidence. It is a script. Over the next few days, the letters escalated, each one arriving earlier than the last. Certified mail, red stamps, bold headings, final notice. Immediate action required. The language tightening like a noose, but never quite. Closing, and every time I called, I got the same tone, the same careful phrasing, the same refusal to provide anything concrete. Meanwhile, small things around the property started to shift. A city inspector drove by twice in one afternoon, slow enough to notice. A utility notice showed up claiming a discrepancy that did not exist. Even the patrol car that usually cut through the neighborhood at night began idling a little longer near my driveway. Just enough to be seen. It was coordinated, not sloppy, not emotional. And that was the moment it clicked into place. This was not about dues. It was about pressure, controlled, incremental pressure designed to make me fold before I ever understood the game. I stood in my kitchen that night, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air, holding one of those letters under the overhead light, and instead of calling again, instead of pushing back, I set it down on the counter, pulled out my phone, and started documenting everything, every envelope, every timestamp, every interaction, because people like Margaret rely on one thing more than authority. They rely on the assumption that no one is paying close enough attention, and that assumption was about to cost her everything. The next letter did not come in an envelope. It came as a knock, sharp and deliberate, 3 times in a row like someone who already believed they owned the place. And when I opened the door, the morning air carried the faint smell of fresh cut grass and printer ink. 2 men stood on my porch in matching polos with the HOA logo stitched over the chest, clipboards tucked under their arms like badges they had not earned. One of them avoided eye contact while the other held out a document with both hands. Official posture, rehearsed confidence. Final notice of enforcement, he said. Voice flat, practiced, the kind of tone you get from someone reading lines instead of understanding them. I took the paper, felt the weight of it, thicker than the last. More stamps, more signatures, or at least something that looked like signatures. And right there in the middle was a new line that had not been there before. Authorization for structural action due to non-compliance. Clean wording, vague enough to stretch, dangerous enough to matter. I looked up at him, let a second pass. Then another, long enough to make him shift his weight. Just slightly. You are aware this property is not in violation, I said, calm, steady, not a question. He blinked once, glanced at his partner, then defaulted back to the script. All disputes must be filed through the Association Review Board. He replied, eyes dropping to the clipboard like it might help him. I nodded slowly, like I was considering it, like I had not already read every line of their bylaws twice. Memorized the gaps, the overlaps, the places where authority blurred into assumption. Understood, I said, and that was it. No argument, no raised voice, just acceptance. And that confused him more than anything else. They left 10 minutes later, tires crunching over gravel as their truck pulled away, and I stood there for a moment longer, the paper still in my hand, listening to the quiet settle back into place, a dog barking somewhere down the street, wind moving through the trees. Normal life continuing like nothing had shifted, but it had, because that line on that paper was not just escalation, it was commitment. They had crossed from pressure into action, and once people commit, they stop thinking about whether they should. They focus on finishing what they started. That afternoon I drove into town, not fast, not slow, just steady, past the same patrol car parked near the gas station, same officer inside. Same glance in my direction that lasted a second too long, and I filed it away like everything else. Patterns matter, connections matter more. I spent the next few hours somewhere quiet, somewhere with fluorescent lights and the low hum of machines that never turn off, reviewing documents, confirming timelines, making sure every piece lined up exactly where it needed to be, no gaps, no assumptions, just facts, clean and simple. When I got back home, the sun was already dropping, long shadows stretching across the yard, and there was another envelope waiting, taped to the door this time, not even placed in the mailbox, urgency replacing formality. I peeled it off slowly, felt the adhesive resist before giving way, and inside was the date, bold, centered, unmistakable, scheduled enforcement, 48 hours. I looked at it once, then folded it neatly and set it on the kitchen counter next to the others, lined up in order like chapters in a story that had already been written. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and held it there for a second, not opening it. Not yet, just feeling the weight of it in my hand, because timing is everything, and they were almost exactly where I needed them to be. 48 hours sounds like a long time until you realize how fast people move when they think they are about to win, and the next morning proved that, because at exactly 7:03, I heard the first truck, not loud, just a low diesel idle rolling slow past the front of the house, then another behind it, tires crunching over gravel like distant thunder that never quite arrives. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee still warm in my hand, the air cool, carrying that faint metallic scent. That always comes before heavy equipment starts working, and there they were, staged across the edge of my property like they had done this before. 2 trucks, 1 trailer, and the same men from yesterday now wearing reflective vests, posture straighter, voices quieter, like the stakes had shifted and they knew it. Margaret's car pulled in a minute later, precise timing. She stepped out already on her phone, already in control, heels clicking against the pavement in sharp, even beats. I watched her for a moment, the way she scanned the property not like a neighbor, but like an owner, calculating, confirming, making sure everything was exactly where she wanted it. Then her eyes found me again, same smile, same calm, but there was something else now, a hint of anticipation, like she had been waiting for this exact scene to play out. She ended her call and walked toward me, slow, measured, stopping just short of the line where gravel met concrete. Like even she understood there were still boundaries she could not quite cross without saying it out loud. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice smooth as ever. "This is your final opportunity to resolve the outstanding balance before enforcement proceeds." I took a sip of coffee, let the silence stretch just a second longer than comfortable, then set the cup down on the railing that no longer existed this morning. Just muscle memory placing it where it used to be. "You have not provided a single valid document," I replied, not raising my voice, not challenging, just stating a fact. She tilted her head slightly, that same practiced patience settling back into place. "All documentation has been reviewed and approved through proper channels," she said. And there it was again, channels, approvals, words that sound solid until you ask where they lead. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, then stepped aside, not in surrender, not in defeat, just out of the way. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because people like Margaret expect resistance, they prepare for it, they build their confidence around it. But when you remove it completely, when you give them nothing to push against, they lean forward without realizing there is nothing holding them up. She paused, just briefly, eyes narrowing like she was trying to understand what she was missing. Then she turned, gave a small nod to the crew, and just like that the first machine roared to life, louder now, closer, the smell of fuel thick in the air, the ground beneath my feet vibrating again, steady, controlled, intentional. I stood there, watching as they moved into position, every step documented, every action recorded, every second falling exactly where it needed to in a timeline that was already complete in my head, because this was never about stopping them. It was about letting them show exactly how far they were willing to go. And by the way Margaret watched it unfold, arms crossed now, shoulders relaxed, like she had already won. I knew they were almost there. The first impact was quieter than I expected, not some dramatic crash, just a deep, dull pressure as the machine pushed forward and something structural gave way somewhere inside. A sound you feel more than hear, like a door closing in another room that you know you will not open again. Dust lifted slowly into the air, drifting across the yard in thin, pale sheets, catching the sunlight in a way that almost made it look peaceful, like nothing important was happening at all. The operator stayed focused, hands steady on the controls, following instructions that had already been decided long before he arrived. And behind him the rest of the crew moved with quiet efficiency. No hesitation, no conversation, just process. Margaret stood a few feet back now, arms folded, sunglasses on, watching everything like it was a scheduled inspection, her posture relaxed, confident, the kind of calm that only comes from believing there are no consequences left to consider. I shifted my weight slightly, boots grinding into the gravel, and let my eyes track every detail, every movement, every person involved. Because details matter when everything else is noise. One of the crew members walked past me carrying a clipboard, glancing up for half a second before looking away, that brief flicker of uncertainty already there. The kind that shows up when something feels off, but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. The second machine started up behind the first, its engine adding a deeper vibration to the ground beneath my feet, a layered hum that filled the space where silence used to be, and still, I did not move, did not speak, did not interfere, because interruption would have ended it too soon, and too soon would have meant incomplete, and incomplete would have meant useless. Margaret stepped closer again, just enough to stand within the edge of the drifting dust, one hand lifting to brush a strand of hair back into place. Small, controlled movements, always composed, always deliberate. You could have avoided all of this, she said, not looking at me directly this time, her voice carrying just above the engines, like she was offering a final courtesy. I let a second pass, then another, feeling the fine grit settle along my sleeves, the faint taste of concrete lingering at the back of my tongue. That depends, I replied, quiet, measured. On what you think this is. She turned her head slightly then, just enough to study me through the edge of those dark lenses, and for the first time since this started, there was something different in her expression, not doubt, not yet, but a small fracture in the certainty she had been holding on to, the kind that only shows up when something does not behave the way it is supposed to. Behind her, another section gave way. More dust, more open space where walls used to be, and the structure of the house shifted again, not collapsing, just changing shape, losing definition piece by piece until it was no longer what it had been. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the edge of my wallet, feeling the worn leather, the weight of it, still closed, still unseen, and I left it there, because timing is not about reacting. It is about choosing the exact moment when everything aligns, when every action taken before cannot be undone. And as I looked past Margaret, at the machines, at the crew, at the quiet confidence written across every movement, I knew we were almost at that moment. Not yet, but close enough that I could feel it settling into place like the final piece of something that had been building long before any of them realized they were part of it. The structure was almost gone by the time the sun climbed high enough to burn the morning haze out of the air. What used to be walls were now open lines of framing. What used to be rooms were just outlines and dust and light. And the machines kept moving with the same steady rhythm, controlled, methodical, like they were finishing a job that had already been approved long before today. I could hear the hydraulic hiss each time the arm adjusted, the low mechanical whine as pressure shifted through the system, sounds that most people would tune out, but I listened to every one of them, because they marked time, and time was the only thing that mattered now. Margaret had stopped speaking, stopped offering explanations. She did not need to anymore. From her perspective, the outcome was already decided. She stood near the edge of what used to be my driveway, one hand resting lightly against her arm, posture relaxed but alert, watching the final stages unfold with that same quiet satisfaction, like a person reviewing a completed plan. And that was when the first real crack in the atmosphere showed itself. Not in her, not yet, but in the people around her. One of the crew members stepped back from the machine longer than necessary, wiping his hands on his vest, even though they were not dirty, his eyes drifting toward me again, then toward Margaret, then back to the machine. Uncertainty, small but visible. Another worker paused mid-step, looking at the paperwork on his clipboard like he was reading it for the first time instead of the 10th. Those moments matter, because doubt does not arrive all at once. It starts as hesitation, as silence where there should be certainty. I shifted my stance slightly, feeling the gravel give under my boots, the fine dust settling into the creases of my jacket, and I let my gaze move past them, past the machines, to the road just beyond the property line, empty for now, quiet, but not for long. Margaret followed my line of sight for a fraction of a second before dismissing it, her attention snapping back to the task at hand. Control, always control. We are almost finished here, she said, more to herself than to me, voice lower now, less performative, like she was confirming it internally. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, and finally took my hand out of my pocket. The wallet still there, still closed, but now resting in my palm, visible, not hidden anymore. A small change, easy to miss if you were not paying attention, but the kind that shifts everything if you are. One of the crew noticed it, his eyes lingering a second too long before he looked away. The machine in front of us slowed, not stopping, just enough to break the rhythm it had been holding all morning. Margaret caught that, her posture tightening just slightly, shoulders lifting a fraction of an inch, the first physical sign that something was no longer aligning with her expectations. She turned her head toward the operator, then back to me, her expression sharpening, searching now instead of assuming. "Is there something you would like to say before we conclude this?" she asked, and there it was, not a command, not a statement, a question. The first one she had asked since this began. I let the silence sit between us, just long enough for the engines, the wind, the distant hum of the neighborhood to fill the space. Then I looked at her, steady, calm, and for the first time since the machines arrived, I smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to be unmistakable, because everything had already happened, every decision made, every line crossed, every action documented, and the only thing left now was for them to realize it. The moment stretched thin, like a wire pulled just before it snaps, not loud, not dramatic, just tight enough that everyone could feel it even if they could not explain why. The machines idled now instead of pushing forward, engines still running but no longer advancing. The steady rhythm from before broken into uneven pauses, and that silence between movements was louder than anything that had come before it. Margaret did not move right away. She stood there studying me, really studying me now, like she was trying to recalculate something that no longer added up. Her eyes flicked once to the wallet in my hand, then back to my face, and I could see it, that subtle shift, the first real doubt settling in, not fear, not yet, but awareness, the kind that creeps in when control starts slipping in ways you cannot immediately fix. I took one step forward, slow, deliberate, gravel crunching under my boots. The sound sharp in the quiet space that had replaced the earlier noise. Every eye followed that movement, the crew, the operator, even the man with the clipboard who had been pretending to read, because people recognize intention before they understand it. And right now, every movement had weight. I stopped just a few feet from Margaret, close enough that she could not ignore me, but not close enough to invade. Boundaries still intact, always intact. I held the wallet between my fingers, turning it once, not opening it yet, letting the motion itself draw attention. "You asked if I had something to say," I said, voice even, controlled, no edge, no urgency, just clarity. She did not respond, but her posture shifted again, shoulders no longer relaxed, arms no longer folded, one hand dropping slightly, as if she was preparing for something she could not define. I opened the wallet slowly, no rush, no dramatic gesture, just a simple movement, leather folding back with a soft, familiar sound. And for a second nothing happened, because recognition takes time. The badge caught the light first, a small reflection cutting through the dust still hanging in the air, then the lettering, then the weight of what it meant. And that was when everything changed, not all at once, not like a scene in a movie, but piece by piece. The operator's hands lifted off the controls without being told, the engine still running but no longer engaged. The man with the clipboard lowered it completely, no longer pretending to read. Even the second machine idled down slightly, like the entire environment had just been given a new set of instructions it did not yet understand. Margaret's eyes locked onto the badge, held there longer than anything else she had looked at all day, and the expression she had been carrying since this started finally broke, not into panic, not into anger, but into something much more precise, calculation, fast, sharp, trying to catch up to a situation that had already moved past her. "What is this supposed to mean?" she asked, and for the first time her voice was not smooth, not controlled, just slightly off, just enough to notice. I closed the wallet halfway, not hiding it, not fully revealing it again, just enough to keep it present. "It means," I said, calm, steady, "you should have asked for real documentation before you started this." And I let that sit, not explaining further, not filling the silence, because silence does more work than words when the truth is already in front of you, somewhere down the road, faint but unmistakable. A different kind of engine sound began to rise, low at first, then building, not rushed, not chaotic, just steady, intentional. And this time, Margaret heard it too. The sound grew clearer with every second, not loud, not urgent, just steady, controlled, the kind of approach that does not need to announce itself because it already knows exactly where it is going. Gravel at the edge of the road shifted as the first vehicle turned in, tires rolling slow and deliberate, followed by another, then a third, all moving in quiet coordination, no flashing lights, no sirens, just presence. And that was enough. The crew noticed it first, heads turning in small, uncertain movements, conversations that had not even started fading before they could begin. The operator fully released the controls now. Engine still idling, but no longer engaged. Like the machine itself understood it was no longer part of the decision. Margaret did not turn immediately. She held her position for a second longer than she should have, like she could delay reality by refusing to look at it. But eventually she did, her head shifting toward the road, her posture tightening in a way that no longer looked controlled, just held together. The vehicles came to a stop one by one, doors opening in measured sequence, not rushed, not chaotic, just precise. And the people who stepped out carried themselves differently than anyone else on the property. Not louder, not more aggressive, just certain, the kind of certainty that does not need to explain itself. I did not move, did not step toward them, did not call out, because I did not need to. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Margaret turned back to me then, faster this time, her composure slipping just enough to show the strain underneath. You called them, she said, not a question, but not fully a statement either. I tilted my head slightly, considering her words, then shook it once, slow, deliberate. No, I replied, calm, steady. You did. And that was when it landed, not fully, not all at once, but enough to change the air between us. Because people like Margaret understand process, they understand sequence, and somewhere in that moment she began to see the chain of events not as something she controlled, but as something she had triggered. One of the men from the arriving group stepped forward, not directly to her, not directly to me, just into the space where authority naturally settles when it is recognized. His eyes moved once across the scene, taking in the machines, the crew, the remains of what used to be my house. Then he looked at me, a brief acknowledgement, nothing more, then back to Margaret. We are going to need all documentation related to this action, he said, voice even, professional, not raised, not aggressive, just final in a way that does not invite argument. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again, words forming slower now, less certain. This is a private association matter, she said, but the sentence lacked the weight it had carried all morning. It sounded smaller, thinner, like it no longer fit the situation she was standing in. I watched her carefully, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just observation, because this was the part most people misunderstand. The moment when everything turns is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, precise, like a lock clicking open. The man nodded once, not dismissive, not confrontational, just acknowledging that he had heard her. Then he reached out, slightly, palm open, waiting, and that small, simple gesture carried more authority than anything she had said all day. Margaret hesitated, fingers tightening at her side, eyes flicking once more to me, searching, calculating, trying to find a way back to control that no longer existed. And in that moment, standing there in the dust of something she believed she had already won, she finally understood that this was not the end of a process she started. It was the beginning of one she could not stop. Margaret's hand hovered in the air for a second too long, fingers tightening around nothing before she finally reached for her folder. The same one she had carried like a shield all morning. The same one filled with papers that had sounded so certain just hours ago. She flipped it open, movements sharper now, less controlled, pulling out documents one by one like they might suddenly become more convincing if she handled them faster. Everything is right here, she said, but her voice no longer carried authority. It carried urgency, and those are not the same thing. The man in front of her took the papers without comment, his expression unchanged, eyes scanning each page with a calm that did not react, did not rush, just processed. And that kind of silence is heavier than any argument, because it does not give you anything to push against. Around us the entire scene had shifted without anyone announcing it. The crew had stepped back, not instructed, just instinctively creating space. Machines idling low like they were no longer part of the moment. Even the air felt different, the dust settling slower now, Like everything had paused to see what would happen next. Margaret watched him red, her posture tightening with every second that passed without a response. And I could see it clearly now, the realization forming piece by piece, not sudden, not dramatic, just inevitable. The way truth usually arrives, quietly, without asking permission. The man lowered the last page slightly, his thumb holding the corner as he looked up at her. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just direct. "These documents do not authorize what has taken place here," he said. Simple, clear, final. And that was it. No raised voice, no accusation. Just a statement that ended everything she had built this on. Margaret blinked once, then again, like her mind was trying to catch up to words that did not match the outcome she had already accepted as finished. "There must be some mistake," she said. But the confidence was gone now, replaced by something thinner, something searching. I shifted my weight slightly, boots pressing into the gravel, feeling the ground steady beneath me, because unlike everything else here that had not changed, "There is no mistake," I said, calm, even, not stepping forward, not needing to. "You moved forward without verified authority, you bypassed proper review, and you documented every step of it." I let that last part sit for a moment, watching her expression tighten as the meaning settled in. Because documentation works both ways. The same system she relied on to control others had just recorded her crossing every line she thought she could hide behind. One of the vehicles behind the man opened again. Another person stepping out with a tablet in hand, already reviewing, already connecting, already building the case that did not need to be forced because it had been handed to them completely. Margaret's eyes moved between them now, faster, searching for an anchor that no longer existed. "This is a private matter," she tried again. But the words sounded distant, like she was repeating something that no longer applied. The man shook his head once, not dismissive, just certain. "Not anymore," he replied. And that was the exact moment everything settled into place. Not with noise, not with drama, just with clarity, the kind that does not leave room for interpretation. I looked past them, over what used to be my house, now open sky and scattered structure. And for a second the wind moved through it freely, carrying away the last of the dust, leaving everything exposed exactly as it was. And I realized something simple, something people like Margaret never understand until it is too late. Control is not about how loudly you act. It is about how precisely you wait, because justice is not loud. It does not need to be. It just shows up when everything else runs out of excuses.